Welcome everyone to Friday at the Malvern Retreat House. We're going to be taking a look at the second reading from Sunday's liturgy. For 16 weeks we've been listening to Paul's letter to the Romans, and this is the final installment. This is week 16 of 16 weeks. The letter to the Romans is Paul's longest letter, and it's by far his most important letter. Some people say it's one of the most important writings in Western civilization. It summarizes Christianity and Christianity's impact in Western civilization and really on world history can't be denied. A lot of people will say that Paul's letter to the Romans captures what Christianity is all about. You know, Paul is really smart, but Paul would never consider himself a philosopher. He was much more practically oriented. He wanted to get things done. He was always dealing with problems in his churches. That's why he wrote these letters. Paul really wasn't a philosopher, and he wasn't a theologian. He didn't kind of sit down and think things through very rationally. He was just kind of thinking on his feet, thinking on the fly, and offering suggestions and reflections, usually to problems that he heard about in the churches that he established. This reading might be a little bit of an exception. Paul asks kind of the big questions. Maybe he asks two of the biggest questions we ask as human beings. Why was I born? And then what happens when I die? And life really takes place between those two fundamental questions. Why was I born? And what happens when I die? So Paul, in his own way, tries to answer those questions in this short reading. A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, none of us lives for oneself, and none of us dies for oneself. For if we live for the Lord. And if we die for the Lord. So then, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. For this is why Christ died and came to life, that he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. You know, Paul was kind of an A-type personality. He was really driven. He was kind of success-oriented, super smart. He was fluent and comfortable in three different languages and in three different cultures. So Paul was kind of content with the life he was living until he heard about this person called the Christ. And there are three different descriptions of St. Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. And two of these descriptions look like they came out of the blue. They just, this encounter with Jesus Christ on the road to Emmaus just kind of ambushed Paul, and it completely changed his life. A third description, in Paul's own hand, was that it was more gradual, that Paul at first rejected the people who claimed that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, but then Paul started to wonder himself and started to question. And at one point Paul says that he was kicking against the goad, that what he meant was that the possibility that Jesus Christ was the Jewish Messiah and God was creeping up on Paul, but he kept kicking it back, kicking against the goad and resisting it. Well, whether his conversion was immediate or more gradual, it was a conversion. And not simply like the way we think about conversion, turning away from sin. For Paul, he had never really been a sinner in that sense. His conversion was toward Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ completely changed his life. So after his conversion, life was basically seen through the eyes of Christ. That's what Paul would acknowledge. And that's how Paul approaches these two questions today. Why am I born? And what happens when I die? Paul says, why are we born? We're born for Jesus Christ. What happens when we die? Well, we die in Jesus Christ. And between the beginning of our life and the end of our life, everything is Christ. Everything is Christ. So Paul is kind of reflecting, maybe in a philosophical way, but it encourages us to really take our own relationship with Jesus Christ seriously. Okay? The decisions that we make, our thoughts, our words, our deeds, all that should be looked at through the lens of Jesus Christ. And I think if we do that, we'll be putting Paul's letter to the Romans into practice in our own lives. Whether at the beginning of life or whether it's the end of life, whatever happens throughout life, we do it for Jesus Christ. Amen.